Welcome back, guys. Today I'm going to be doing the long requested long-term review of my Yeti SB150. I've had this bike for a little over a year now. I bought it in August of 2019 and I've really enjoyed having it this past year or so. This is a 2020 model, so in 2019, Yeti introduced the SB100, the SB130, and the SB150, which are all 29ers. So this is the second year model of the SB150, and it's been a great bike. It's designed as an enduro bike, and I've kind of been using it as a little bit of everything bike. This bike has done park days with me. It does a lot of local trail systems with me. It climbs, it descends. I'm doing everything with it. So when I bought this bike, I did a couple things that I knew that I wanted to spec it out as when I bought it, just to get it set up correctly for me. As you see here, it's a decent little climber for being a long travel 29er. All right. When I picked up this bike, I had them install the Synchros front fender, which I picked that fender specifically because it does not require the zip ties that a lot of the front fenders do to attach directly to the Fox fork. I did get this thing set up with cush core from the factory because I knew I was going to be doing park days with it, and I didn't want to run the risk of having any issues with the tires bottoming out or denting a rim. It is very fast and smooth, particularly on the downhill sections. And it jumps pretty well. I also got clear frame protection installed all over the bike, in addition to Yeti's normal rubberized down tube protection and chainstay protection, which is pretty good, but I just didn't want to risk anything extra chipping the paint, and just to give me a little bit extra to protect that carbon frame that this bike is. Now, of course, all of Yeti's models are carbon, not aluminum. They don't make an aluminum frame. With that frame protection, it just gives me a little bit more peace of mind. And I think it was less than $40 for the frame protection. And I just had the bike shop install that when the bike came in. So it was one of those buy it and forget it kind of things. In addition, this bike comes with a pretty good set of ODI grips. They had the Ergon GE1s on the 2019 model, and they switched over to the ODIs in 2020. And I've had Ergons before on some of my other trail bikes, and I love them. So I rode with the ODIs for a while. I've since swapped back to the Ergons, and I feel like they're just the most comfortable grip for me and my riding style. And grips are obviously entirely preference based. I just feel like contact points are important you're comfortable with. downhill rock sections. Super comfortable, super planted, and smooth. And it just chunks through just about anything you can throw at it. But like I was saying before, the 3 contact points, the seat, the pedals, and the grips, I feel like as a rider are very important that you get right, because those are the 3 parts of your body that are going to connect with the bike. And if you don't feel good about your contact points, your riding experience is seriously diminished. So grips were 1 for me. Continuing on that theme, I got a set of race face Chesters in turquoise blue as my pedal setup. I love race faces. I cannot say enough good things about the Chester. I'm a flats guy. I've ridden clipless before, and there's nothing wrong with it, and a lot of people prefer it, but I, especially with the park stuff, have more comfort being in flats. So I went with the race face. It's what I run on my downhill bike. I like the fact that it's between $30 and $40 for a pedal set, so you're not breaking the bank. It's polymer, so if you do bang it up, it's easy to replace and just say, okay, no big deal. This is the Yeti SB150 X01 build. So it's got an X01 driveline, Fox transfer dropper on the seat, which on my bike is Kashima coated, so it matches the Fox 36 up front with the Grip 2 damper. I love this fork. I am actually going to swap it out in the next month or so with a Fox 38, just because of how much downhill I do with this bike. I wanted something that's just a tad stiffer. Not that there's anything wrong with the 36, but the 2021 SB150s actually come spec'd standard now with the Fox 38 now that it's available, and it just simply didn't exist when I bought this bike last year. So I'm gonna give that a whirl. Look for a video moving forward where I do a comparison of the 36 versus the 38, but I'm very excited to try it. Like I said, the 36 has done great by me, but it's just time to try something a little more aggressive because of how much big stuff I'm doing when I go up to the mountains. This trail stuff that I'm riding now and this is more than adequate for the 36. In fact, this bike as it's set up is way overkill for 90% of your trail rides. That being said, I'll move more into the feel of things. Now we've talked a little bit about components. It loves to be pushed. The faster you ride it, the harder you push, the more stable this bike gets. And it's kind of incredible in that regard. I've not owned another bike where I can't push it hard enough, including my downhill stuff. I've had multiple bikes over the last few years, and this is the one that I just keep coming back to because of its stability with speed. It loves to go fast. It loves to do big drops and jumps. Brakes are excellent. They're Code RSCs. They're fantastic, 200 millimeters up front, 180 in the rear. Great stopping power. I've only ever had one issue with heat on these brakes, and it was downhill during a park day. It was just a really, really long, steep descent, and they cooled off very quickly. So again, very few issues with the brakes. They're more than adequate for this setup. Essentially, as close as you're gonna get to a full downhill setup on an enduro bike. Now, interestingly enough, this was my first 29er. I've had a plethora of 27.5s, so this has been a different bike for me just in that regard as well. Thanks, it's just me. That being said, it takes a minute to get adjusted, because going from that 27.5 to 29er setup is definitely a change. I'm extremely comfortable with the climbing on this, I think in part because of the bigger wheels. But it just wants to roll over everything. Whereas a 27.5 to me has always felt a little more poppy and a little more playful. This bike, by contrast, is very planted, both in the descents and in the air, which is very confidence inspiring. It doesn't feel as nervous as some of the smaller wheelbases I've ridden. The other big piece of this bike specifically that people kind of look at and go, huh, what is that? Is the rear linkage setup. It's got your traditional shock in the rear, like most full suspension bikes, but it's got Yeti's proprietary Switch Infinity system. And Yeti came up with this and started producing it back in 2014 on their old SB5s and 6s. And it's just a really, really neat design. And the whole idea behind it is that they took essentially two dropper posts, cut them down, mounted them side by side as a low pivot point. And the reason it's called the Switch Infinity is because it actually changes the direction of the stroke halfway through the travel. And the reason they did this was because it gives you better anti-squat compliance, but it also, on the small stuff with the shorter stroke, gives you better small bump compliance as well. And then when you take the really big hits, it switches direction, so you get the full depth of the travel of that Big Fox Float X2 in the rear, which it's mind-blowing how smoothly it works in my personal experience. I love it. It makes the travel feel significantly longer than it actually is, and it makes the landings much smoother. As an added benefit, the pedal bob and kickback, it's just awesome because it kills a lot of those bumps without even hitting the lockout on this bike, which it does have. So that's always been really cool, because you don't have that ability oftentimes when you get a full suspension, longer travel bike to lock things out without actually locking things out. But it does drop so well. It's so stable. And I think a lot of that is just that rear linkage design is just so efficient. Other upgrades, the big one, I did swap out the wheel set. This came stock with DT Swift 1700s and Minion DHF up front, Minion DHR2 in the rear. I did keep the tires. I swapped out the wheel set, and I went with the Industry 9 Enduro 305s with the Hydra hub, and I love these wheels. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to watch my review on that wheel set, because I have a whole video on just the wheels, so I won't go too deep into details today about them, but they transform this bike. They're phenomenal for pedaling power because the engagement is so low, which is not the primary function of this bike. This bike does just fine uphill, but it really shines doing the downhill stuff. So adding this wheel set for the hub engagement and uphill was nice, but the real benefit in these wheels is the stiffness that they offer. They are still an aluminum wheel set. However, they have the i9 thread through spoke, and they are made out of aluminum as well instead of steel. So they are lighter, and because they are thread through, they're a little thicker, and the wheel set overall is stiffer. So that's been really nice to add on to this bike, just to make it really feel like the complete kit. If you get this bike and you're riding it with the DT Swiss set, I'm not knocking DT Swiss. They have fantastic wheels. I was just looking for a little bit more, knowing how much I was gonna put this bike through with the rigidity, just to kind of match more of that stiff feel that I'm already getting from the frame. The carbon X01 build on this comes with carbon bars and carbon cranks already. I have really enjoyed the feedback that I get from these bars. So the cranks obviously is more of a weight savings thing, which, let's be honest, on a full suspension bike, I'm not really sure, since I'm not running an XC build, makes that big a difference, but it is kind of cool to have them. Now, as far as Yeti goes, brand itself, I obviously did a lot of reading and research before I bought this bike. And one of the big complaints that people have is that in general, when Yetis have problems, it's not been the easiest to get in touch with Yeti itself to get some feedback from their service representatives. I personally have not had that experience. I've had a number of small, detailed technical questions over the last year, just about functionality of things, components, maintenance, and that kind of just really generic stuff. Yeti's always been really quick to respond to me via email, and they've always been super helpful with their responses. Yeah. Thanks, it's just me. Okay. So my experiences may differ from some of those. You guys have not had the best feedback from Yeti. That being said, I have had a couple problems with this bike, and nothing of catastrophic issue, but stuff that could have caused catastrophic issue. So a while back, I was getting a really weird ghost shift in the rear end, and it wasn't consistent, and I could not for the life of me figure out why. I was looking at everything from cable tensions to the bump stops on the end and figuring out why everything just wasn't quite lined up. Come to find that the rear axle had started to unthread itself, and it wasn't even after a bunch of crazy aggressive riding, it was after a bunch of normal trail use. And so the back wheel was essentially holding the axle in because of the chain tension. So that was, I'm glad I caught it, but it could have been really, really bad, and would have had I not caught it. I love this drop. Nice. And over this rock garden, some sharp stuff in there. These tires with the XO Plus rating, just eat it up. So anyway, I tightened that back down, and it did have Loctite on it, which really surprised me. Got blue Loctite on it. But interestingly enough, this rear triangle in general seems to be the point that I have the most issue with, because I've had a couple of the Allen head bolts that attach the shock to the rear triangle wiggle their way loose as well. And that presents itself more as a rattle than anything else. And again, that's super easy to identify when I'm riding, and so I've caught it the couple times it's happened and just tightened it down, thrown some more Loctite in there. But I don't know if you guys have an answer as to why this particular frame seems to have that happen. That is my only real gripe. And again, it's one of those things, now that I know to look for it, when I'm doing my regular bike service, my chain maintenance, you know, looking at the brake wear and all that kind of just normal stuff, I just make sure I go through everything and hit those points specifically and make sure they're tight. Now, I will say after those few initial times that I've had issues with them and I've added some more Loctite, it seems to still occur, but at a much slower rate. So I'm hoping that this is just a weird, you know, thing that happens with this frame as you ride. But I've never had that experience in any of my other bikes, so I thought it was a little odd. But again, I've been fortunate that nothing catastrophic has come of it. I can only imagine though that had I not been as observant as I was, I would have the potential for a pretty significant crash if any of that actually worked its way completely loose. So, only real concern with that. Other than that, I would not change a thing about this bike. As it sits, it is a fantastic platform. I think for 29ers, Yeti has nailed this. This can do the uphill. It excels at the downhill. It is more than capable of doing everything. For having as much travel as it does, it is a fantastic little climber. It is never going to be as efficient as a 100 to 120 mil rear end travel. Those of you that are probably watching this are not here to watch the uphill. You're here to see what this thing can do over the rough stuff and downhill. So I do appreciate all of you guys that have checked this long-term review out of my 2020 Yeti SB150. Thanks again. If you have not already, please like this video. It helps me figure out what you guys want to see moving forward, and subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. Have a good one, everyone. Peace.